That sounds good. Treat yourself.
Haven't done it in a while.
Hey, Dave. Hello. Muted here. All right, so this was a Angular 1.5 upgrade needed only, I guess.
What came out of, I guess that was where I thought it would be interesting, so what came out of what actually just on the master. That's the first step in upgrading at this point, right?
I mean, what did we have to do to get it to work?
Yeah.
Sure, we can kind of give an overview of what went in and start there. Is that okay? Everybody on the call? All right, I'm gonna take that as a yes. Biggest things, lifecycle hooks. So we can start replacing our directive calling on initialize and all that stuff with just on init. And we have a little bit more granular control of when things happen. So you can like on change, on destroy, on init, all those things. But because of those lifecycle hooks, things are just a touch slower, and Angular does rendering just a little bit differently now that it's put different things into different phases of that lifecycle. So when we did the upgrade, we found a lot of automation wasn't working because it was just a hair out of place, or you get a stale element exception because, you know, somebody changed something during the life cycle, and by the time it was done, Angular was performing about it and re-rendered it or something like that. So while we get more control because you know there's now 5 life cycle hooks, it's also a little bit slower because it runs through things, you know, at preset times.
Is it 01 slower, or is it like if you have a lot of shit on your page that compounds and makes it kind of like
Hard to say. It was different things in different states.
I mean, I will say that we saw a lot of automation failures on the touchpoint context page,
Yeah.
and those are a lot of templates and other directives on top of a directive. So we definitely saw some slowness there. Those lists loaded.
Yeah, I'm seeing a huge slowdown with the way assets is loading inside of actions because we're not doing pagination. And so we already have a performance issue with our lists, and when you have an unfiltered list of 160 assets, that spikes the watch count, and now I think in conjunction with 1.5, we're seeing like 4 or 5 second lower delay before the list is going to show.
Sure. So my question then is, I don't know anything about the lists.
That's definitely
I did. But maybe in those cases, it might be beneficial to look at the one-way binding. It cuts a reducer. So if you have a bunch of stuff that you're just shoving into a static list, basically, you can do the one-way binding and you'll reduce all those watchers. But you do get one-way bindings now.
We're using the single binding to kind of get that same effect.
Oh, okay.
The bind once pattern.
Okay.
But one observation that I had with a lot of this in terms of timing, I'm not necessarily sure that 1.5 is any slower, but I am certain that the compile routine has been completely rebuilt. So the timings are just different. It seems like the on-init lifecycle hook gets triggered after all of the directives and subdirectives have fully compiled.
Not linked.
What's that?
Not linked, though.
No, they won't be linked yet. But there's something about it used to be that these things kind of fired as you went down the chain and then you come back up. It seems to be now that it goes down and up the chain and then it goes ahead and fires the on links, well, the link and then, well, the on init first and then the link after that for all of them kind of in one cycle at the end of it, rather than being kind of iterative down the tree and then back up. And I think that's where some of the timing concerns have come in. I think, though, when you're looking at it from a performance perspective, their things are loading in the same time. The visual cues are pretty much identical, but the actual like markup under the hood is just being bound to the DOM in a different timing cycle than it used to be.
Yeah. So that's one of the things. I pointed out in one UI before, but I don't know if you all saw it. Angular Mocks now does a full, well, it probably did a full digest before, but that also means that it runs from on init all the way to on destroy. So it goes through the whole compilation to destruction. So you need to have your mocks hydrated, because if you do anything on a destroy or on destroy, if you use the lifecycle hook, it's going to get called at the end of each spec. So if for whatever reason you're testing on destroy in isolation, that doesn't mean it's getting called in isolation. You're not manually controlling it anymore. It's just going through the normal build and destroy. So that one was some of the things that changed. But other than that, we didn't really see anything crazy.
So should we not test the on destroy function of the controller?
You're going to test it implicitly. As soon as you write on destroy code, it's going to get called for you.
But I noticed that if you look at your code coverage, it doesn't get hit.
It will now, right, or what you're saying.
Yeah, it should get it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think the point is we shouldn't be calling scope.$destroy in order to test the destroy callback. The destroy callback is now just call it directly on the controller, like this $on destroy, and then you can test it as a function. It doesn't have to be bound to any kind of scope. It doesn't have to be bound to any digest cycle.
Okay.
Right now, when we look at some of the directives we're doing for the list,
Yeah.
we do have code there in place to do the testing of the destroy being triggered.
Yeah, we do. But I mean, but a lot of times I'm not even trying to test that, because a lot of times you're taking private functions and you're killing them, but there's no way to, other than, like, what are you testing?
What are you testing as a developer?
Yeah.
At this point, we're just.
I have a describe in there to run it, but I can't test it.
Okay, well, no, if you're actually talking about what you're testing, that's a different discussion.
Yeah.
I'm just saying your on destroy is going to get called. So if you try to call a method on something that you didn't hydrate, say you had a mock, right? And
Yeah.
then you call that mock you call that seams method into destroy, that's going to get called. But if you didn't create that method, you're going to get an undefined error. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
I'm not saying what you actually have to test in the on-destroy. I'm just saying that provide everything you need for a full life cycle.
Okay, I get it.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying what to test, just that you need to have everything. Otherwise, you'll get undefined errors. So obviously, the big thing we got was components.
But did you start converting over to components?
Nope, that was what today's talk was about.
Yeah, I started looking at your PR and didn't see you guys starting to convert, so
No.
that's.
And the thing to take away, though, I mean, that will hopefully come out of this meeting, is that components don't necessarily replace directives. They're used in different use cases. So that's what we kind of need to hash out. Like if you're doing attribute level stuff, that's still a directive. That's not a component. So, but you can leverage the one-way loadings.
That's a decent segue to what I have at the top of my list.
Okay.
For the use of component right now, the real kind of singular place where we should be using components is for our modules. Essentially, any ng controller instance in the past that we updated to potentially a directive bound to an element, those are essentially just template directives, and those are solid candidates to push to a component. One caveat there is right now we do have with our module loading system, we do have support for directives because we've got the oneargs property key that can be passed into the initialize to handle kind of the instances of how we handle actions and all of that crap. That won't necessarily work out of the box on the dollar on init until we figure out how to support that in the module loading system. So while I think those are the easy kind of low hanging fruit of like, obviously this is a component, there's no real directive functionality that we need here. We probably don't currently have support to be able to do that. So if anybody has any ideas around that or wants to take a stab at the module loading system to support being able to load components from manifest files, that would be pretty neat. And we probably need a technical debt to target that goal.
Sounds like we just need to do that in general. We keep finding more and more things that we need to handle.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it kind of points to the whole idea of the module loading system is kind of an unwieldy beast. It works really well for us. It's stable. I hesitate to try to refactor it, and I also hesitate to replace it with anything unless we're upgrading to Angular 2, because Angular 2 gives us there just aren't any good 1.x lazy loading solutions for module loading without kind of wrapping a third-party plugin into like Webpack to really get what we're doing now. And if we're going to go that route, you're already talking about gutting the foundations anyway. And it just seems like something as part of the rewrite rather than spending time on a refactor only to rewrite it 6 months from now using Angular 2. So if there's a quick and easy solution to kind of extending component support to our current module loading system, then I think that's great. But I think if it's going to be like this whole module loading system needs to be completely refactored, I don't think we should spend our time there.
It sounds like we need a spike out of this.
What's that?
Sounds like we definitely need a spike then.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll capture that.
Okay. Cool. Thank you. So other than that, I guess, till we figure that out, all my stuff was component-based things I wanted to talk about. So I guess my stuff is now in theory for best practices and stuff like that. The biggest one that is hard for me to get my hand around is the callback bindings, 1.5. So the callback bindings are cool. I like it, but so let's back up. So one-way bindings means that when you get a bind in there, you don't get a watch. But if a child needs to communicate back up to a parent, you get this new and binding. And what that does is it executes a callback, but inside of the parent scope. So you get evaluations and expressions in it. The syntax is super wonky, so I suggest you guys look at it and try to understand it. But this kind of, the practice around this is that even though you're getting a one-way binding, it's still all by reference. So again, it's still, don't lose sight of the fact that we should be using pure functions like array concat, or once we get ES6, the array spread, object assign, anything like that, because you still can mutate objects and arrays even on a one-way binding. But if you do want to update a parent, you have the and callback, so you can mutate it that way. So I would just say that would still, I mean, that's nothing new. I just want to make sure that we don't abuse the one-way binding and think that we aren't impacting a parent scope member, because we are still by reference.
Yeah, so one thing to note in there with the one-way binding, if you have a parent that needs to respond to a change, and you have a child that's going to use that that value, I mean, short of having a one-way event loop that is kind of decoupled from the DOM structure itself. It still seems like, I mean, I know everybody's like, oh yeah, don't use two-way binding ever. But I really would beg the question of does that child really need to know that information from its parent, or can it retrieve it a different way? And if that's the case, does the parent really need to respond to the change, or is that the child's responsibility to handle? So consider if you end up with that pattern where you've got a parent and a child, and the child is going to change a value and the parent needs to respond to it, consider that architecture a little bit as potentially, it kind of sounds like a code smell to me. There's likely another solution where one-way binding can still be utilized, and the actual change response can be a little cleaner, rather than passing callback functions down through child components and all that.
Well, to that point, I would, who's that?
I think it was just
Okay. To that point, I mean, ideally we could get away from callback, the whole idea of callbacks, and choose one-way binding if we got Redux into the application.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Like short of having a one-way loop that's completely decoupled from the DOM tree. Yeah. So if we had a Flux-like architecture of some sort in there, whether it's Redux or like with Angular 2, they're using NGRX, which is basically Redux on steroids. I mean, there's ultimately that solves all of these problems of this kind of like the need for two-way binding. And that's where one-way binding really shines. So I don't know. Have we already written up the tech debt for integrating a Redux-like pattern for one?
Not as a whole, no.
I think it's been discussed that we wanted, that there was a problem, but I don't think there is one.
Okay, I'm
Sounds
going
like
to go ahead and I'm going to capture that one as well, just so we.
It sounds
have
like it'd be a piecemeal solution, though, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's not about updating all of the modules to use it right away. It's about basically baking in the support and then starting to implement piece by piece as we're able to. And so when you do run across that scenario where you find yourself writing a parent controller that needs to respond to a value change from a child,
In Redux is there or whatever.
have the option to go ahead and be like, yeah, this probably belongs on the global state and needs to be passed through the event loop.
Do we have to, should we, if we were to do a spike or anything like that, should we, maybe that's part of the spike, identify areas where we actually could get use out of it in the application? Because I mean, it's come up in journeys and it's come up in obviously the extension, but in terms of like just plain design time, I mean, how many opportunities, how many use cases do we really see for it?
All of these challenges that we're dealing with, the URL storing the page size, all that stuff that we're fighting with lists.
Yeah.
All of that gets completely cleaned out and is like a low-hanging fruit for a Redux loop. And that would probably, in my mind, that seems kind of like the first place to start, is allowing our components to interact with the global state store, so our modules can subscribe to that state store rather than having to depend on the component for handling things.
I think it's key for us to flush these patterns out first before we're bothering to go implementing it anywhere. And I think once, even if we're not going to, like you said, if we're not going to do it wholesale, because it doesn't make sense until we're in there. If you do it piecemeal and then actually have those patterns in place and well documented from the beginning, we go to do new development, we can, really refactor things and make it a lot better. I think that's a good path to go. I question whether whether, it seems like there's a lot of different options as Redux, and like you were just saying, NGRX, and there's a few different things. I mean, as a part of that, are we revisiting again what we want to use as our framework for state management? Or are we already in bed at this point of saying we're Redux going forward?
Yeah, I mean, the NGRX is Angular 2 only. And the transition from Redux to NGRX is minimal.
Okay.
It's really you would just reconfigure how you build your store, and you might need to change the method, your name you're using to subscribe to that store. But otherwise, it's got the same basic idea of obviously the refactor going up to Angular 2 would be more significant. This kind of state transition would be quite simple because we would have kind of the patterns already established. We would just rewrite it in the Angular 2 way. So it's a one-to-one translation, which is nice. So that said, I mean, yes, there aren't really other libraries out there that really do what Redux does as simply as it does it. Certainly there are some Angular Redux kind of third-party components and whatnot, but the version that we installed in Journeys is just pure Redux with reselect, and it's simple and easy to work with. So we probably just go from there rather than relying on a third party to kind of keep up to date as Angular moves to 1.6 or whatnot.
I'm fine with it. I'm fine with that. I just wanted to make sure just to make sure there wasn't something.
Yeah, I think.
Make sure that we've decided as a group, that we've decided in general from an architectural standpoint, that's what we're staying with, so we don't keep bouncing around. Because
Right.
we've kind of gone through the evolution with from Flux and then obviously to Redux, which I understand the reasoning behind that. I just want to make sure that that is our silver bullet, if you want to call it that, at this point for state management in our application.
Right. Yeah.
It's pretty beautiful. I mean, don't get me wrong. I just throw it out there just as a last thought. Maybe go down that path.
Yeah, I will say there's nothing really on the horizon to immediately place Redux, and there's no strong argument to do so. NGRX is just a very popular Angular 2 Redux flavor with observables and reactive programming baked into it. So it is Redux still. It's the same pattern. It gives you a little bit more with a little bit less API.
Yeah, that's good. Okay.
So as long as we're on 1.x, I mean, the Redux implementation is very simple and straightforward, and should at least set us up for an easier transition for Angular 2. There is that question though of, does an Angular 2 upgrade, I mean, does the work spending on Redux for Angular 1.x, does that merit the amount of time and effort it may take to implement, only to be kind of migrated / rewritten in Angular 2 down the road? And that's a question that's difficult to answer at this time. I think we don't really have the political credit right now to continue doing like kind of UI refactor focused work. We really need to start focusing on features and at least spend 3 to 6 months really grinding out features to get some of that credit back, so we can plow forward with some of the more significant refactors down the line.
Okay, so bringing it back then to the discussion on best practices, some things I keyed in on was that we should, we've started using the controller as syntax everywhere, but Angular 2, we shouldn't be mucking with what the controller is, from what I understand, like what it's named. Basically, don't override the default $control. So when we are writing components, we shouldn't have an alias, a custom alias. But that's only in components.
Only for components, right?
Right, yeah.
Which we don't have.
We don't have it.
Yeah.
I think that's a good one to key in on if we ever get into that. And then the other one was I'm not really sure about it, but you can use on changes one of the life cycle hooks to break references to the bound data. So maybe we should be leveraging that more, but that kind of depends on our Redux state and that state management. But just if anybody uses that, the big thing I keyed in on was that on changes is called before on init, which seems weird. I think like it would be called.
I think they just want to make sure that your state is hydrated before you go ahead and initialize your controller. Because on changes, I think like $watch gets called with the initial value.
Yeah.
And the initial value is whatever the parent controller is binding to it through the bindings.
I didn't really have much more because a lot of it has to then do with like functional programming and ES6, and we don't have all of that lined out. So that's all I had brought as important things to me. Does anybody else have anything else?
My main things were mainly around hoping to, as a part of this, flush out the Redux piece. And I had looked at the component, basically. Other than prototyping, it's hard to really, at this point, have a say as to what exactly are the best practices. And I think the TD is, or Spike is a good for us to go there. But that is the extent that I personally have been able to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, the upgrade was, I mean, the main thing was components. So, I mean, there's really not much to talk outside of that. Our best practices we have today are still working just fine. Oh, Ty's presenting. So, I mean, unless you guys have anything else, I mean, we don't really need to keep hashing it, so. Anybody on the phone? Adrian? Guy?
Yeah, I mean, I think
don't
the
have
life
it.
cycle hooks are important because they can be used. They can be used outside of just components. They can be used everywhere.
Yeah.
And so anytime we have an initialize that doesn't take an argument right now, that initialize handler can naturally be just migrated to this $on init, and really should be. Those are easy and cheap wins. Same thing with on destroy. If you find that you've got a directive that says scope dot on destroy, and then it just calls the controller on destroy, we can remove that line from the directive, and we can replace the on destroy and the controller with $on destroy, and it just.
The other thing you can do is if on init is too early and you need the directive to do something for you, use on link. So after it's been linked, you can do stuff with it. Cool. So if you need the directive to set up some DOM or something first. Cool.
Adrian, it looked like you were about to say something.
Yeah, I was saying that I don't have anything to add.
All right, well, moving on. What's next?
See if I could present here. Hit me. Is it just, anybody else see that in presenting anything, or is it just a black screen? Because nobody else did.
Ask Kai.
Yeah. Kai, am I presenting anything, or is it just a?
Well, I see you guys in the room on one, and I see your smiling face with Thunderhead on the other.
All right, it's the THDC Wi-Fi.
Well, Colin's figuring that out then. The CSS lint, I put a note on it. Less.js actually has a less hint. So,
Sorry.
So actually, I went to their website and this is the one they recommend. So there is a less hinter. I definitely feel like we should vet it and maybe get into the pipeline.
Yep. Set up a spike and send Danny the licensing on it.
Okay.
Double check that it works.
All right, so how do I?
Although licensing is probably moot because it's the development tool, so it won't be shipped with the product.
Go to add members.
So I guess we can skip that.
So I will do that. JT to create a spike and get licensing to Danny. Okay, I'll do that later. So I can move that one over to, well, it's not included yet. Was there anything on the error handling, logging, displaying best practices, or did we just still leave it as we're waiting on New Relic? Or we don't know yet?
I think right now this has did that tech deck get set up? I think I may have seen it come through at one point.
Anybody like tech debt on it?
I think I may have. I'll double check.
All right.
It's got my name on it, so I'll look into it.
Adrian, are you done with the one animate one?
Yeah. I added a comment in there. I asked Mark and Travis, and they said it's not a concern at this point.
All right, so feel free to move that card then and get it off the follow-on work.
Okay.
What do you guys want to talk about on the left-hand side of the team discussions?
We can fit in 20 minutes.
Sure, I know the one at the bottom is quick. Does anybody have anything else? All right, so the one on the bottom then, we started doing the one validation, putting it in different places, the new one validation component. The thing we found was that you can't have two isolated scope attribute directives on the same element, which makes sense. So before, I think we were always trying to do isolate scope on every one of our directives. If it's a component, that should be okay. I'm not quite sure yet with components, but if we're still doing directives like one focus or validation or anything that's an attribute level one, use bind a controller. But that's really what we wanted, was we wanted to be able to access it through the controller. So just have scope true for inheritance, and then bind to the controller what you need. I think other than that, yeah, so we should be using bind to controller basically for attribute level directives when we want to take something in off of the parent directive. Just as a heads up. And I have the error that you can run into, the compiled multi-directive thing that you might see. So that one's pretty quick. Just keep that in mind if you're making a new directive that's an attribute level.
Yep.
For the directives right now that aren't using isolated scope, I ran into this, I can't remember which one it was, but should we be updating those to be?
If you find it and you're trying to work with it, I've just been baking it into the amount of effort for that story to finish. So I've just been fixing them as I go. If you find that you can get away with not fixing it, write up the TD right then. But I like with the one validation, I had to fix it. So it's just part of the effort is getting the one validation. The other one I had was, we were talking about UI tech debt priority. We have a backlog, which I put as the one UI Slack channel. That's the link to it. So until we get an architect or we get, direction, feel free to look at that list and pull in things as we go. We should talk about it. If there's anything on there that you're trying to figure out, like, hey, was it created about this or whatever? I prioritize it right now with things that already had versions on them. Everything that had a future version or no version on it, I just left at the bottom. But I also went through a lot of it and just ended up deleting a lot of stuff, closing stuff out that was no longer relevant. So feel free to link to those things or pull them in if you have free time.
Hey, I was just checking that backlog board. It looks empty right now. I'm not sure if there's some filter that got turned off or disconnected. Just a heads up.
That's fine.
Where's the link again?
To the very top of the
Very
slide.
top of the One UI Slack. Are you sure, Kai? Because everybody here says they're getting it.
Oh, pardon, okay.
Maybe it's just me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it may have been a temporary glitch with Jira on my end or something.
Like right now, obviously you guys have those things in flight with PC14. But I've been in my spare time as we've been talking things after UI meetings and as things have been coming up in TDs, I've been moving stuff around, but I'm not really the person that should be moving things around. I just was trying to do it so that it was clean and we all could talk about it. But I know like some things that we pushed to the top was the error handling, or it was at the top anyway, unless somebody moved it. But yeah, so
Yeah.
this is something that we can use when you're trying to groom stories and you're bringing in product management. Feel free to look at this board and be like, we want to get this tech that in because it'll make our next story easier, or we just want to do it. And that way you kind of can get that. And if you guys see anything on this list that you're like, oh, I already fixed that. Like I think I had talked to you, Chris, like platform UI using the new build process, anything like that, linking it in so we kind of know where it's at. Again, I'm not the owner of it. I just put it together so we could all see it. And we can take it from there with what we got. But I mean, you can see all these things that have been semi-groomed and are at least ready for estimation with, somehow they have fixed versions of PC15. I don't know how they got there. But it seems like they knew we had been talked about. So.
Yeah, a handful of these have been prioritized by Peter and Dara. I know Peter and I have talked about a lot of these that are marked PC15. Some of them, though, I'm not sure. When you guys are writing up a tech that, just make sure, unless you know that the priority has already been placed for a targeted release, just add future release as the tag.
Yes, I highly doubt we're getting through all of these in PC15.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if we don't work on any of the features.
Sure. That's good, though. Thank you.
Let's not get us all moved over into one repo for the UI stuff, though. That would be fantastic.
So the other one is a big talk, so we can let that one go. I didn't know who added the other two.
Yeah, the bottom two I can address real quick. There was a PR where one of the unit tests was coming through. There was still a little bit of VAR assignment. I think, though, in hindsight, it looked like that was maybe just a legacy upgrade, and it was a bit deceptive. But we should really make sure we're using this to bind our test variables to ensure proper cleanup and prevent scope leak between tests. So just a heads up on that. The other one I think is a little bit more involved with the spies versus mocks. So one of the patterns that I've seen a little bit. I mean, obviously, when you've got a controller or whatnot, you've got a couple services that are injected, and we want to be able to know when some of those service methods are called, so we don't have to test them. Mocking takes a little bit more boilerplate. It's actually fairly easy to just use the injector to pull the live service in, and then just kind of set up spies on the methods that you want to spy on. And then if you're comfortable just using the result of that service, you also don't have to kind of rewrite its functions as callbacks. So I'd kind of like to propose as a best practice that we, as much as possible, use spies in place of mocks, and really that way we only need to spy on the things that we're actually concerned with in the controller. And we don't have to worry about recreating or kind of rewriting fake methods that essentially do the same thing as the live methods.
I agree. I just was getting feedback, but I agree. I would just be cautious of letting Jasmine call through. because you may have unintended side effects that you want to prevent.
My other concern around that would be, maybe it's not even a valid concern, but when you're testing your code coverage, when you're looking at the code coverage, make sure that you're not assuming something got covered because it got called by another test, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you inject, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, I already had code coverage on this entire service. It's like, well, you did it, but you never tested it.
Yeah, you actually have to make sure that the use cases that you're testing are actually being covered. Like what it's supposed to do has expressive tests that test its functionality.
Yeah.
Code coverage should only be an indicator that you've not even remotely gone close to something. It should be an indicator that you have covered it.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah, and spies will prevent those methods from being run in the tests as well. So
As long as you don't call through, like I said.
yeah, so manually returning a predicted value or whatnot generally tends to be the way to go for that type of thing, because we don't really care what the implementation of that service method is. That'll be tested on the service level. So we can just return the values, and that actually then prevents that bleed of coverage.
Is there, quick question, is there a way to spy on multiple methods without using create spy object?
You mean to spy on a service, you want to spy on like the multiple methods on the service?
Yeah, without calling spy on for each.
Just map over it.
I thought you could.
That's creating it. That's creating it. Just map values and call spy on.
We should probably create kind of a test helper to make that use that boilerplate if necessary.
I will say I'm a little uneasy about going down that route, only because spy on is so crazy simple and explicit. So it's very easy to see what you're spying on. When we start masking it behind helper functions, it gets a little bit less obvious. And with tests, transparency is king. So I would argue that the extra 4 keystrokes or whatever that you need to punch in there for each method that you want to cover is worth it for 6 months later when you go back to look at what you're spying on.
I feel like you could create a pretty transparent helper method that's essentially spy on, but with array syntax.
Right, but then new hires need to learn that unique API within the company, rather than just saying, well, we use Jasmine and look at the Jasmine docs, and then we have to maintain documentation, and it has to be findable. So there is some overhead with going down that route, and I don't think the spy on syntax is incredibly complex. It takes 2 arguments. It's 1 function with 5 letters in it. It just doesn't seem complicated enough to merit abstraction.
Fair enough. That's all right. I'll just open up a pull request for Jasmine 3.
Yeah, I think actually that's a really valid response. I mean, if there are features that we feel like we're missing in the tools that we use, instead of creating custom wrappers within our application, maybe it would be great if we're proposing PRs for feature requests. So if that's something that you feel strongly and passionately about, I don't necessarily think it's a bad idea. I just think having it within Thunderhead is more overhead than is needed. But if it were something that could be added to Jasmine, go for it.
Yeah, fair enough.
So we shouldn't lose sight of that. I mean, these are all open source tools, so we can contribute where we need to.
Is there anything else other than this other ticket, which I say we hold off for the next meeting? Just because I guess we have a 1 product video launch in 9 minutes.
I just had a question about the spies versus mocks piece. So if we do end up modifying or messing with or working on a spec that does in fact have all these mocks, as a part of that, is it required that we go through and refactor to these spies? I just want to make sure I'm clear on that.
If it's easy, you would definitely be doing a service by dropping some boilerplate. If it's really kind of tightly bound into the tests, I would kind of leave it. I don't think it's an urgent thing. I think it's one of those just moving forward. Consider the SPI first, and if the SPI really can't work for you, then go ahead and mock out the service.
Yeah, I asked the question only to make sure that if I'm working on something and I touch it, I want to be clear about what needs to be refactored and what.
I would say if you touch it, you should.
And that's what I figured.
Yeah.
That's what I was expecting to be said.
But if it's outside of your test.
So it's a good question for people doing the PR, right? So if you know what I mean?
You could also, I would say at the outset, if you decided to be like, hey, I'm not doing spies here, I don't think anybody would get mad at that, as long as you follow the pattern.
I'd be mad.
Yeah, I only, I asked the question to be more clear, so.
And I think it helps too, because I think that's a problem that kind of bit us on the list stuff. What's a factor? I think that's in scope for refactoring what's on us, but just kind of ahead of time. So.
You guys want to give us 5 minutes to get some coffees before our next meeting, and then the meeting, and then the meeting, and then Paul's meeting?
We have our sync up.
So we have a sync up after the meeting.
Yeah, no, first we have 2.0.
All right, thanks, guys. Stay safe.
Cool. Thank you.